Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining both in person and online this second edition of a series of webinars on trading goods in the digital era, improving import, export, and transit procedures, which is being organized by the Market Access Division here at the WTO. Today, we will be looking at the use of digital technologies to improve business to government or B2G procedures, but from the private sector perspective. My name is Roy Santana from the Market Access Division, and I will be moderating this session today. As you are all aware, supply chains are very complex networks of processes, activities, organizations, resources, and technologies needed for the creation and delivery of a product or service from the initial raw materials to the final consumer. Complex supply chains are needed to produce even the simplest of products, and many of them require the collaboration of tens or even sometimes hundreds of companies and extend across multiple countries. If I think of a very simple product like a pencil, we need probably the wood from one country, the graphite, the metal has to be extracted, processed, produced, the rubber, everything needs to be put together, paint, you get the picture, right? So you need many, many companies working together to be able to produce all these products. At the WTO, we're particularly interested to understand the cross-border aspects of these supply chains, and in particular, the relationship between governments and the private sector, or this B2G, as it's called in the jargon. And again, today, we're focusing mostly on the import, export, and transit procedures. It is a well-known fact that digital technologies can significantly improve supply chain operations, including these B2G relations and the functioning of the procedures. Some technologies that are frequently mentioned in these discussions include blockchain, Internet of Things, machine learning, and lastly, this webinar would not be complete without mentioning artificial intelligence, which has become very popular lately. Probably you're going to hear this term many, many times from the presentations. The new technologies can enhance not only the efficiency, visibility, and transparency of the procedures, but they can also improve the security, resilience, and compliance with government procedures. They have also made it possible to integrate and share real-time and more trustworthy data from various sources like businesses, customs, other border agencies, transportation routes, shipping, air, etc. All of these among traders, customs, and all other government agencies. All these features have coalesced in a considerable potential for reducing the paperwork and red tape, which of course can also reduce time and cost for these border type of operations. And all of it while improving the monitoring capacity of governments, compliance, preventing fraud, and facilitating disruption management in supply chains. Today, we will be exploring three issues. Firstly, we have all heard a lot about the potential of some of these technologies, including success stories, but we would like to understand what is really happening on the ground today. Which technologies are currently being used to improve import, export, and transit procedures? Secondly, and going beyond these success stories, we would like to better understand what have been the challenges faced by businesses and governments in implementing these new technologies, and what has been done either separately or jointly amongst private sector and governments to overcome these challenges. Finally, as Malcolm X once said, the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. So we would like to understand what's next. In other words, what are the developments the future holds for us in these areas, and what can we expect from these new technologies in the coming years? Without any further ado, let me introduce now our esteemed panel of experts in alphabetical order. I think you're going to be very, very pleased. We really look very hard to get the best possible people to talk about these issues. First, we have Ms. Amy Morgan, who is the Vice President and Head of Trade Compliance at Altana Technologies, where she leads global trade and compliance solutions for the enterprise and public sectors alike. Amy has over 24 years of experience working in international trade and compliance, mostly as Vice President cross-border for tax compliance software company Avalara. Amy began her career managing global trade and customs compliance operations for industry giants such as Amazon, Costco, Wholesale, Nordstrom, Microsoft, and is a licensed US customs broker. Second, we have Mr. Lars Carlson, who is Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting at Møller-Mærsk, and is widely known in the field as a customs expert, with extensive background over more than 3 decades working in both governments and the private sector. Before joining Maersk, he was for 10 years managing director and co-owner of KGH Customs Services, company in the area of customs, borders, and trade policy. Lars also served 6 years as the director of capacity building at the World Customs Organization. So Lars is very interesting because he has experience on both sides. Thirdly, we have Ms. Louise Wiggett, who is the founder and managing director of Global Trade Solutions, GTS, a company based in South Africa. Louise has more than 28 years of experience in the international trade, supply chain, and logistics ecosystem. GTS provides consulting services underpinned by innovative solutions to enable the optimization of international trade, supply chain, and logistic environment. But unfortunately, she had a problem just a few moments ago. And then I understand that Mr. Anton Eckles, who also works for GTS, would be replacing her in the presentation. Last but not least, we have Ms. Sandra Fisher, who is the SVP Global Customs and Regulatory Affairs at the DHL Express Global Head Office. Sandra is an expert in customs and trade compliance who manages the strategic oversight of customs and export control operations, and she oversees approximately 15,000 customs professionals, managing the clearance of 200 million shipments annually across a global network of more than 220 countries. For our audience, both in the room and online, please note that I will open the floor for questions at the end of these presentations. I understand we have approximately almost 200 people online. If you are joining online, you will also be able to submit questions through the chat box. And then we will manage with my colleagues, Irina and Daniela, these questions. For those people in the room, we will do it in the traditional way. So basically, you raise your hand, we give you the floor, you introduce yourself, and then you can raise the question. To the presenters, I would like to apologize in advance because I'm going to be quite strict in the management of the time. So I may need to stop you at some point. So please try to stay within the limits that have been agreed. Oh, I understand actually Luis is able to join us. So welcome, Luis. We will almost be getting to you. Let's now begin in the order that I introduced the speakers. So we're going to begin by the presentation by Ms. Amy Morgan. So Amy, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and good early morning from New York. I'm Amy Morgan, Vice President, Head of Trade Compliance at Altana, where my job is to identify ways to use Altana's technology to address real trade compliance problems. I am a licensed U.S. customs broker, and before Altana, as Roy mentioned, I managed trade compliance for some of the biggest companies in the world. But I'm so fortunate that my journey has led me to this fascinating intersection of artificial intelligence and regulatory compliance. I'm honored to join this esteemed panel representing innovative technologies that are indeed transforming global trade and supply chain operations as we speak. My goal today is to show this audience of trade ministers and private sector folks how Altana's technology can access essential data to meet our national objectives and overcome those challenges that were once deemed impossible by both the government and the private sectors. At Altana, we're driven by a big mission: to build a prosperous world where commerce is based on trust and transparency, where buyers, suppliers, regulators, and all global supply chain stakeholders share one unified view of trade activity. And this collaborative approach is essential to address the challenges that have been causing both the public and the private sectors to seek these innovative solutions to help achieve their goals. So these challenges aren't a mystery to anybody in this room today, but the challenges include geopolitical conflicts, extreme weather events due to climate change, crime and terrorism, and additionally, any unforeseen event such as a pandemic or a logistics disruption that could pose those significant hurdles. And many governments and regulators facing these issues, they're exploring new trade policies, but they might be struggling to actually address them effectively. And why is that? Most likely, it's a data problem. Companies and regulators must be able to exchange data safely and securely and use that data to influence policy decisions, to facilitate trade activity, and engage in more targeted enforcement priorities. And however, if they do manage to obtain that data, it often looks like this, right? It's messy, it's scattered across different systems, it's in multiple languages, different formats. This makes it hard to analyze for threats or to assess for impact and for compliance. And this task is too complex for humans alone, but AI makes this possible. Only artificial intelligence can consolidate this messy, multilingual trade data at scale to reveal the insights and the patterns that were previously hidden or inaccessible. And that's why Altana uses AI to merge, cleanse, deduplicate, standardize those billions of public and proprietary trade data records, as well as non-public data at a massive scale into a shared, unified model of global commerce, a comprehensive, dynamic map of the global supply chain. This map constitutes the world's largest and most organized collection of supply chain data, featuring over 500 million companies linked by nearly 3 billion transactions. And on top of this map, Altana has built the world's first value chain management system. Altana has made it possible to pull all that messy trade data from customs declarations and shipping and commercial documents, data about importers, exporters, suppliers, production, trade regulations, into detailed value chains. So what is a value chain? A value chain is the multi-tiered life cycle of a product. It is a clear view of the inputs as they transform into finished goods, from the sourcing and production of raw materials through the intermediate goods, the final assembly, and ultimately to sale and end use. And by using AI to aggregate all this data, Altana offers a very clear view of how those raw inputs are transformed into finished goods. This reveals layers within product-specific value chains, layers that even the most diligent companies might not be aware of. And until Altana, there was no way to know, connect, or manage across these extended global networks. But now we can take advantage of an approach we call value chain management to go beyond traditional supply chain management, or simply knowing our supply chains, to understand how products are made and their relevant impacts on our businesses. With AI-generated value chains, we can rethink our approach to influencing policy decisions, facilitating trade activity, and influencing enforcement. They enable companies and governments to see their relevant global multi-tiered trade networks within a broader global context. And then on top of these networks, governments can apply specific lenses to focus on the areas that are important to their national interests and their trade priorities, such as compliance or security, sustainability, or even resilience. This may involve focusing your value chains of particular commodities or suppliers in specific regions. And effective value chain management leads to better resource allocation and sharper, more precise decision-making. And it's only with this view, that this clear understanding, that we can take informed action, that we can collaborate with our supply chain stakeholders, that we can explore relevant value chains, tackle issues, evaluate, investigate risks, perform scenario modeling, among other strategies. And this approach is not science fiction. This is real. Several forward-thinking governments and companies have already started using this approach for social, commercial, and environmental good. In the government case, this technology has been proven and is being used by several governments that are actually represented here today. Some are using it to influence their economic security policies, such as the UK government. Others, like the Australian government, are using it to advance resilience priorities. And then there are governments that want to prioritize how they use their enforcement resources at the border, such as being able to investigate for certain things, such as illegal drug imports or deforestation. And there are also companies using this approach. Some want to avoid the importation of sanctioned materials or products derived from deforested lands or goods subject to forced labor, or even helping track and measure carbon emissions. So now I actually want to show you how Altana's map of the global supply chain illuminates multi-tier value chains. I'm going to use carbon emissions as the example today, because recently companies have started using emissions measurement solutions for corporate responsibility reasons, financial incentives, and reputational benefits. And now, because of the emerging Scope 3 legislation, that's a major factor, right? Promoting fairness for domestic producers and those that are choosing greener suppliers by requiring global companies to actually track the emissions across their product value chains. So in this quick demo that I'm going to show you, by integrating all that messy data we talked about earlier, live view of our live product. And in this situation here, oh, hold on here. Okay, so when I log into Altana, all that data that we talked about is now organized in this product catalog table, making it really easy for me to view all my value chains for all my different products, pumps, containers, iron and steel products, along with a summarized calculation of their carbon emissions data that Altana has calculated across each of these products' value chains, and I will explain that. But first, I want to actually find the emissions for one specific product. So let's choose this product, this stainless steel product here. And Altana's platform has, in that one click, found all of my tier 1 suppliers and then used artificial intelligence and machine learning models to surface just the facilities trading in the products that are recent and relevant to those tier 1 facilities. Altana then ran the same process over again to trace the tier 3 relationships, and so on and so forth. We can go as far back until the data runs out or we hit the actual Earth. And since I'm only interested in carbon intensive suppliers today, I'm going to group all of these suppliers by emissions risk. And I'm focusing on steel goods. And let's just take a look at this first supplier. Altana shows me a lot of information about the supplier. I can scroll down and I can see their activity. I can see their capacity, their emissions, their rank. These are all estimates at this particular stage of the value chain. I can even see any notes that my teammates might have inputted about this facility directly into the product, which is all really interesting information. But what I really care about here is exactly how those emissions are connected to my business. So when I click into this network view, I am immediately presented with a multi-tier value chain for this specific supplier and product combination. This is actually a really amazing moment. This is the multi-tier value chain that links that tier 3 supplier to my stainless steel product. Remember earlier when I said that Altana takes all that trade data and creates value chains? This is an example of that. In this chain, my stainless steel product is represented here on the far left, and Altana makes all that underlying data that connects these different facilities, they make it available so I can actually trace the transactions that link the Tier 3 facility in question, ABS, to the Tier 2 facility at Bharat Forge. And then likewise from Bharat Forge to Rolls-Royce. And what's cool here is that all of this underlying transaction data that links those entities, it tells you what the products were. So you can actually watch the iron and steel product transform into actually manufactured parts and pieces that went into the ultimate product. Right, this view lets me follow those goods through to the final assembly and importation. And doing this manually would have been nearly impossible without AI, right? The Altana did all that hard work for me. And this data provides those insights that any user would need to take the appropriate action, right? As a private company, I can measure and report the carbon emissions that are linked to my goods. This is possible, so that when I report it to the regulators, the governments can pinpoint where their emission sources are located. And this method enables more precise product and facility level calculations. It enhances accuracy, reduces the need for manual data. It fosters collaboration and compliance. And now I can make more strategic decisions about how I lower my carbon footprint. So I'm going to toggle back to my slides. So in that demo, I went through very, very quickly because I know Roy's going to cut me off any moment. I want to make sure that it's clear that carbon emissions was just one use of this technology. This same multi-tier visibility is essential for compliance with other trade regulations, forced labor, sanctions, due diligence. And here are a few other use cases we've heard from other governments that I thought this group might be interested in. So leveraging AI, governments can analyze their trade data to better understand their global position. They can pursue more robust or modernized public-private partnerships and collaborate between the public and private sectors. They can enhance compliance using value chain intelligence to assess the cross-border transactions in real time so they can spot issues like transshipment or misvaluation, misclassification, or smuggling. And we can modernize our trusted trader programs to facilitate safe and trusted activities. So I'm eager to discuss these ideas further. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Here is my contact information. I really hope I hit 15 minutes on the mark.
Thank you, Amy. You even had 1 minute left.
Oh.
When you were making and showing the valuation, I just realized I should have asked you to do it for the pencil, no? But anyway, I guess for the next one, we can do it. Let's now move on, and then we're going to have the presentation by Lars Carlson. So Lars, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope that you can see my screen and see my presentation now. So I'm Lars Carlson, and thank you again, Chair Roy, for inviting us from WTO for this very timely event and timely experience of actually having this discussion here today, because it's really needed. And as was said in the beginning, I'm Lars Carlson. I'm the Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting in AP Møller - Mærsk, but I have a long career in customs, also being on the other side of trade policy, both in the World Customs Organization and for many years in Swedish government as well. And of course, we all know that we live in a challenging and very complex world that's getting more complex every day. And I'm absolutely convinced that we will see more changes the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 50. And we, of course, in AP Møller - Mærsk have seen a lot of that as well, as being one of the biggest movers of goods in the world. And of course, we've had everything that you deal with every day, but also, of course, all the other macro crises and problems we have seen this year, of course, with the Red Sea crisis, with the drought in the Panama Canal and the terrible accident in Baltimore as well, on top of all of those other things that disturbs international trade today. Now, we in Maersk are in transformation, like our industry is in transformation. And this is some of the things we're going to talk about here today, because we know that, you know, as have been the biggest or one of the biggest ocean shippers in the world, that was mentioned in the beginning as well, that this is how goods are moved. We are today something else. We define ourselves as an integrator of trade. meaning that we do services end-to-end for our clients because our clients is asking for that. So it's very much about supply chain management, supply chain supervision, and supply chain monitoring to be able to serve end-to-end, regardless of transport mode, not only on ocean, but also on air, land, and rail. And of course, by doing that, we also need to look into various new things. How can you actually handle this in a better way with all those issues around resilience that we've seen over the last couple of years? And there's more to come, of course. You are trade policy people. I had my own experience from being in standardized or setting organizations and policy organizations before. And for the moment, of course, we also now see a tsunami of new ESG regulations, as also Amy was referring to in her presentation around technology. And of course, this is good because we are all in the situation where we as private sector and all of us as our organizations having these ESG topics as top of our agenda. We are transforming the industry of ocean carrying and carrying of goods around the world into something that is more sustainable. And we are doing so, and we want to be trade compliant by doing so. But it's also, of course, about how we implement the new regulations that is coming to place. And that is what I'm going to spend the rest of my time on talking today, because I always say it's very important that we do not replace red tape with green tape. We need to do this in a smarter way. And what is the smarter way? Well, the smarter way is using the fact that data today is the big game changer. So while we see these new regulations coming up in various geographies now, and its environment, its social protection, and its governance issues, we see, of course, the regulations already in place. That the US forced labor legislation, there's other forced labor legislations on the way, supply chain due diligence regulations, and of course, the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe, which is now following in other geographies as well. And of course, these new two sort of regulations have it's totally different from some of the regulations we've seen in the past. And we are now thinking about how we can actually, from a private sector perspective, together with government, make sure that we can implement these regulations in the best possible way for ourselves and for our clients. Because there's a number of challenges here, and it's definitely time to prepare to actually be able to handle this in the correct way, and also in a trade facilitated way as much as possible. So we're not adding burden, of course, to the private sector, which we all know is important for doing the trade and the trade developments that we need to develop our societies. So what is the answer? The answer is supply chain visibility and supply chain multi-tier vetting, as Amy was talking about that Altana and the Maltana Atlas is doing as well. So multi-tier supply chain visibility is something we've been working on in Maersk now for several years. We are doing so together with a number of partners around the world. And the whole point is to pick up, collect data as early as possible in the supply chain from source, and use and reuse it all through the supply chain to enrich it, to analyze it, to use and reuse it, and to make sure that we also optimize the border crossings in those value chains that both Roy and Amy have been talking about. Because we have for a long period of time looked at strategies to optimize the supply chain, to put in place different type of alternative sourcing or routing strategies. What we haven't been doing until very lately in the last couple of years is looking into how does borders fit into this, the black box of the border with multiple agencies, multiple private sector stakeholders that is interacting. And we know for a fact that there's a lot of things we can do by optimizing also the border management and doing so in partnership and doing so together. And one of the things to do that is now that we actually have the data, and the global pandemic and some of the other disturbance we've seen the last years have actually accelerated the way we look at supply chains and how we can collect data going forward. So we look today at trade data, customs data, and all the type of data we can collect from the supply chain step by step. We map our supply chains for our clients. We work together with various partners of the supply chain in the integrated end-to-end journey. And we actually collect that data all through the supply chains. And as I said, enrich it, analyze it, and work with it. We've also started working on concept together, of course, with governments all around the world, using, again, very good new policy initiatives like the UK Electronic Trade Documents Act, and these type of new regulations that also make it possible to do supply chains fully digitally. Because this is the future. This is what we define as Global Trade 2.0. And Global Trade 2.0 basically has 4 elements as we see it. One is it's digital, fully digital, no papers involved. 2, it's based on trust and trusted trade lanes and certification of stakeholders, vetting of stakeholders. It's about interoperability of both policy and standards and data. And finally, it's about also using and utilizing industry standards and industry systems to actually make this a partnership where we share data as much as possible to be able and cover the various demands that are there for regulation point of view or for trade facilitation point of view. And it's about securing the supply chain and the supervision of it. So smart borders, where governments are working with digital borders rather than the physical typical border of the past. Smart containers, where we supervise the goods itself from end to end, and I'll get back to that on my next slide. Supply chain visibility by having the commercial data in addition to the official data we submit at any border to any government agency. And of course, the digital track and trace we can do to actually make sure that we also have the supervision of the goods. When adding these elements together, we are starting to see trusted supply chains, trusted trade lanes, and again, looking at how can that actually enhance the interaction with governments and border agencies and anybody else that needs that type of visibility, data for risk management and border management to safe and securely make sure that trade can be as efficient as possible and can be not only predictable, but resilient over time. So we use technology and we use artificial intelligence and pattern recognition and machine learning for a number of things today already, as also Amy alluded to, that governments are doing, but also private sector and us and the industry is doing right now. So we do the supply chain mapping. We know the mapping very clearly. We put together with our clients various alternative strategies, as I said, for sourcing, for routing. We do stakeholder vetting. And I'll get back to that as well in just a minute. We do, of course, the data management, the full process automation bit, and again, the supervision of all of these things from the vetting of stakeholders, partners, clients, and of course, in various ways, the goods itself, and getting that together in packages of data that we can use and reuse together with government agencies today. So predictive analysis is where we are going with this journey. And this is an example of what we call digital trade corridors today that we already have in place, that is already operational with some of the countries in the room and others as well on the way on practical matters. So there need to be a framework of legislation around these type of new setups. There need to be technology platform on open source, which we have today. There need to be trusted trader and authorized economic operator schemes that actually vet also the suppliers and the different type of stakeholders of the supply chain. And then the smart technology can be smart containers. And what we define as smart containers is a container that is 24/7, all around the time, all around the day, supervised from access, of course, from temperature, from movement in the container, humidity, and several other elements as well. And that data is available, and we're also sharing it with governments today, so they can actually use that as a track and trace. But it could also be other type of technologies like smart seals and so forth. Smart containers are not in place. And of course, we have then early warning signals, like many of the big movers of goods, meaning that those early signals are there to very early in the process detect if something is wrong, if something needs to be checked, if something needs to be supervised. And of course, sharing those early warning systems together with government agencies is one way to make our borders and make the full supply chains, and by that, trade end-to-end much more efficient, cost-efficient, and better. And of course, AEO, as was mentioned before, Authorized Economic Operator Program, Trusted Trader Program, is there already today. It's becoming the passport for goods. And the next elements of it, what we call AEO 3.0, what is the future? It has to be digital. We have those digital systems today to vet different type of stakeholders. And my message to you today is let's start using these already certification programs that are there for government agencies from different type of international institutions. And of course, from the WTO and the Trade Facilitation Agreement and World Customs Organization is a safe framework of standards, and various other similar certification programs. Let's utilize them, let's update them, do them digitally, and actually start using the trade compliance records of those traders that actually have a compliance record to, again, be used together with policy to actually make the supply chain work better. So we have a number of various ways of using this technology. We use them for the regulations that is on the screen and that Amy was talking about before as well. We work together with Altana as one of our main partners for this. So we do use the Maersk Atlas powered by Altana for our compliance system, for our classification system, of harmonized system of commodity codes for customs, and also for de-risking the supply chain in itself. And I'll end my presentation by a practical example, because I think this is something we can learn from. And one of the things that we've been doing the last years that is really interesting is the ecosystem of Trustpilot with the UK government, where UK government, in implementing the UK border strategy post-Brexit, actually went to private sector and said, can you show us what your industry systems are doing today, and show us in sandbox mode, in practical pilots, how can we actually exchange better to make the border more digital, more streamlined, more resilient, and more predictable. So during a year, we had one of these 6 projects that was done. We led it in Felixstowe, the container port of UK. And we worked together with 11 companies, 3 of our clients, Morrisons, Westbridge, and Pure Electronic. And also the other players and partners, and also competitors in the port, and 11 UK government border agencies. And we exchanged those data. We exchanged pre-arrival, long before the goods were there, supply chain commodity data, voluntary extra commercial data on top of the declaration data that we have, the AEO, authorized economic operator data, that is vetting, and the vetting that Amy was talking about of the supply chain. We used and also exchanged to these 11 government agencies the smart container data that actually then showed the 24/7 track and trace of the goods itself. And we did so for 700,000 commodities operationally in 6 months. And of course, the results were really amazing. Better risking, better control results, better inspections, improved security for governments, as some of them, as you can see on the screen. We did measure more predictability, 40% less time through the port, less food waste, less carbon emissions, and a lot of savings in various ways for a private sector. So this is working already, and we are in dialogue like many others, and I'm sure Sandra can give example for DHL, who we also work with in many other cases, together with governments where we can exchange different types of data. So finally, final point, Roy, I know I'm getting to the bell to toll for me soon, is actually the technology change. What have we found from these projects we have done in piloting together with government agencies, together with governments, and with other private sector partners? First, the intra-government exchange of data is a challenge. So it's very difficult for government agencies to actually exchange data with themselves. It's easier to exchange it with us. So if we have memorandum of understanding, framework regulations to actually show how we can submit more pre-arrival data for, again, voluntarily for some of these issues I've been talking about, it sometimes is extremely difficult for government agencies to send something back to us in private sector or exchange between agencies, the typical single trade window challenge. And that need is something we need to resolve. Systems interoperability and also policy interoperability is a challenge. So we need to start looking at if there's new ESG regulations, the more similar they are, the better solutions we in private sector can put in place, then the better there will be implementation of these regulations. Trade quality issues, there is still trade quality issues. We see acceleration of data, of trade data and digitalization today, but we still have issues with some of the data elements that needs to become better. And specifically, this is important to be inclusive with the new trade that we see. So we also get developing countries to actually thrive and being part of these value chains. And we need some killer applications like the e-bill of lading and several others that is coming. Not necessarily do we need to digitalize all trade documents that are there today. We might have to remove some of them, or maybe we could. but again, making it easier to exchange data voluntarily. And my final point would be, sometimes we hear private sector don't want to share data. Yes, we do. And if the rules are right and we know why and how we are doing it in a safe, secure environment, then we will also do it. And the real question for everybody, are we ready for it? Is private sector compatible and the systems we are using compatible? That is what we all need to think about. And it's about doing the right thing, as Mark Twain once said. Doing it in the right way is even better. So let's think about how we can work together, because this is something we can only solve private sector together with government agencies, policymakers, and international institutions. And with those words, I thank you very much for your time. Happy to take your questions afterwards. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Lars. Only 1 minute over, but I think we're still doing fine. One interesting thing you said is that we shouldn't replace the red tape with the green tape, but this reminded me of a friend from Brazil who once told me that in reality, what we should be aiming is to replace the red tape with the red carpet, right? So we should really try to find a way in which we have fast, efficient, and better controls. And I think that's the challenge, and I think that's what technology is really allowing us to do now. Let's move on next to the next presentation by, I think, hopefully, Luis. If I understand correctly, you are online. So, Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roy, and also the other colleagues from the WTO. I just want to make sure that you can hear me clearly. I'm actually greeting you from Africa, and to take it one step further, from the African bush in Botswana. So it shows you technology does work, and it is able to connect us from wherever we are on the world.
Luis, I was going to tell you, we see you perfectly, but something happened. Just give us 1 second to see. But then if that's...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Luis. Now we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Must I start over?
We can hear you, but I think the volume is a bit off, a bit low. Can you please try again, Luis?
Is that better?
For the interpreters, is it okay? Yes, please, Luis, you can go.
Okay. I'm going to keep my video off, unfortunately, just to save some bandwidth. As I mentioned, I'm greeting you from Africa, and I'm actually greeting you from the African bush in Botswana. So in essence, we can say technology does work, and it does connect us all over the world. Amy, Lars, thank you for your presentations, and a big thank you to the WTO for inviting us to talk about this important concept. And Lars, thank you for leading into my presentation, because you spoke about sea, and I'm going to tackle road. So I think I want to start with the digital first approach. Does it work? That is the big question, and I think both of the previous two speakers addressed that. So from an Africa perspective, can you hear me?
Luis, we lost you for a few seconds, but then I think you're back. Let's try again.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. If I can go to the next slide, thank you very much.
Luis, I don't know if you can see it, but then now we have the second slide on screen.
Thank you very much. As the WTO Director General, we quoted her to say, and especially from an African perspective, 15% if inter-African trade is too little, and Africa's share of global trade at 3% is too little, and we collectively need to do something to either double or triple that. And the challenges that she mentioned to us is infrastructure. Very much we need to digitize more, and we need to also remove the bureaucratic hurdles. As Lance said, the red tape and green tape, and I think, as you mentioned, go to the red carpet. Cost. That is very critical for us. If I can go to the next slide, thank you. If we look at Africa as a continent and at the inter-Africa trade context, our transport costs for least developed countries typically make up 21% of the landed cost of the goods, and transport costs for landlocked developing countries are typically 19% of the landed cost. Now, that's quite frightening if you think what barrier to trade that is. Our processes are normally very lengthy and costly on the road corridors, with multiple border stops and legislation. Focus on duties is important for us, but very importantly is the non-tariff barriers are often more significant than the duty barriers. So we embarked on a project to look at how we can actually eliminate some of these items and smooth the supply chain. We analyzed the typical cross-border road supply chain, and we found that we've got a lot of parties involved. Very often there's not contractual relationships between the parties. The cargo owners still carry the risk. There's non-standardization of the clearing processes, not visibility end to end. Wrong, you've got very little control over it. Customs clearing processes very often still occurred at the border post. And there was a lot of manual emailing of data to multiple parties. And this creates a very time-consuming duplication of data, prone to error process, and very little trust in the data. As Lars also mentioned, the quality of the data degrades as you actually work and hand this data over. So we remodeled the cross-border supply chain into a more streamlined process. And you would actually ask, how does remodeling and digitization go hand in hand? And this is really where we've hit the sweet spot. So what we said is this: customs clearing regulations need and customs agencies need to receive accurate data, and it should be virtually from the source. The processes need to be standardized. It is essential that pre-clearing is done throughout these corridors. Technology is very important, and with technology, we actually eliminated most of the manual capturing of the data. Very importantly, pre-verification and digitization of any of the other government agency processes. We automated the compliance tracking and management. Again, as mentioned by the previous speaker, we use to ensure by the time the data gets to the regulatory authorities, it is as accurate and as clean as possible. Very importantly, we utilize the approved economic operator framework to create a secure supply chain, and then bringing in IoT and smart seals, this time on vehicles, to now enable the tracking and the visibility across the supply chain. And you can see from the picture that we included here that the supply chain actually and the whole process now looks completely different to what it looked before. Instead of having these multiple flows, handover of data via email processes, we now enabled it that the processes happens in one silo. It's one set of data that you work through, and the same information is utilized by the various parties in the supply chain. And this process actually enabled us. We did the pilot, or actually not a pilot. We have been running this project live now for the last year. We did it between South Africa and Eswatini, and it was a public-private partnership where one of our clients were willing to be the private partner in this process, willing to share the data upfront, also participating in the approved economic operator program, which again gives the customs authority a level of trust. Imagining this supply chain process but also bringing in these digital tools, we were able to get amazing results, which I'll share with you on the next slide. Thank you. If you can go to the next slide. So this is the result of what happened. So you can see over a period of about a year, we had documentary inspections where it was interventions either from the customs authorities or some of the other authorities consistently decreasing to just about a level where it's non-existing at the moment. What was also amazing throughout this process is that our clearing time continued to reduce, and you can see over the last periods that it actually fell considerably. So we achieved a 37% reduction in clearing time, a 92% reduction in documentary inspections, and this was combined with the AEO certification process. The time at the border was reduced by nearly 58%. And if you now take it back to our previous slide where we said that so much of the cost is locked up in the transport costs, you can imagine if you can reduce the standing time and the time spent at the border by about 60%, you have equivalent and nearly the same reduction in the are normally associated with time spent on the corridor. So if we can apply this particular recipe to the complex corridors with multiple border crossings, we believe that you can yield massive savings in time and also in cost savings. And as I mentioned, this is a practical example that we've been running for the last year. And you might ask, why did we have this sunny jump in August in terms of the documentary inspections? When you start analyzing the data and you have a look at what happened over an extended period, it also gives you incredible insights into why this is happening and then assist you to try and rectify it. And in this particular instance, there were certain problems that was experienced actually in the June-July period, which then resulted in the customs authorities tightening the risk profile and increasing the documentary inspections. And once their level of confidence had reached a satisfactory level, they then dropped that down again. And you can see now at the moment, we're literally running on virtually no interventions. This for us was a very good experience because it was not just looking at the technology tools that you can use, like AI, machine learning to assist. I think Amy referred to tariff classifications, with getting the data more accurate and allowing the customs authorities and also the other government agencies to have better trust. Now, the lessons that we learned out of this particular project was really, and Lars referred to it, is to get various government agencies to start working together. And in the absence of, for example, a single window for these agencies to be willing to share data. And that has really been the biggest challenge. And I think it's one of the challenges that not only we experience on the African continent, but it is experienced worldwide. And only through this public-private partnership will we be able to ensure that we create a willingness and trust to be able to share this data, and through the use of programs like the AEO program, and bring the other government agencies into this environment of trust and be able to share data with them. Also, very importantly, in this process, we identified that it's not only the technology tools or the process that is important, but it is also the public-private collaboration that became one of the most important tools, with Eswatini Revenue Services being very willing to work with us. In the background, what also happened is that through a public-private partnership, Africa program, Eswatini was enabled to, for example, launch an online e-tariff portal, which makes tariff information digitally available to clients, and also enable clients. They also launched an advanced ruling program, where clients can apply for advanced rulings electronically. So through a combination of private sector initiatives and a combination of people think that by using these technology tools, you're just going to miraculously make this happen. In our experience, we've identified that you have to develop a roadmap and you need to plan against it. Very, very importantly is to do skills development. This particular workshop, I think, is one of those where people can listen in, understand what is practical examples that has really worked well, and get the knowledge out there and not be scared of these new technologies. Very machine learning, robotics, OCRs. We can just go back one slide. We get to the point where we get scared of it because we don't understand it. And through this, these kind of sessions and other sessions, we can actually build those skills. I think very importantly also customer-centric approach. We always need to look at what the customer wants and build our solutions around that. Very, very important. And I think this is one of the principles that we really want to get out of this workshop is to think digital first. So we need to build both government organizations and private sector organizations that think about digitization and digital first. I want to make it clear to the WTO members that they design policies, that they need to have a digital scientist there to look at the policies, the legal text, and see whether it's possible to digitize it. Because very often, unbeknown to yourselves in the negotiation process, certain things might be built into the negotiations and the trade agreements that is absolutely impossible to digitize, and then we break down the digital chain there completely. Very importantly, that we build a culture where we're willing to share, build and track the information, and that we're not scared of putting down key performance areas and then improving on the key performance areas. And first approach, you can adopt a lot of these technologies quite easily. The tech is not the problem. It's very often the willingness to change and the adoption and the ability to adopt to new processes and procedures. And then last but not least, I really want to, thanks, next slide. I really want to show one of the WCO and WTO initiatives, which is critical work to support the ICC digital standard initiatives, which both the WCO and WTO support, brings out a wealth of information. It also enables us to adopt these standards within the private sector and within the government sector, and then gives us the ability to work quite easily because the bottom or the spade work has been done. And this is one of the initiatives that we've adopted in our approach to take the learnings from there and actually incorporate it in the solutions and the approach that we take. Thank you very much. And I think I'm pretty much on time. If we can go, I just want to thank you. My name is Louise Wiggett and my contact details is on the screen. Happy to take any questions or you can reach out to me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis. I think that was very good. One thing I think I like very much you mentioned is this emphasis not only on the digitalization, but also in the simplification of the procedures. If we have bad procedures that we digitize, we end up with bad digital procedures, which of course is not the goal. The goal is to try to have the best procedures as possible, and that of course that they are in digital form. Another point I would like to rescue from what you were explaining is why are we doing this? Again, main goal for us is reducing time and cost while allowing us to do the proper government controls in the right manner. And then if we can do this properly, you can see there's huge potential in terms of gains that can be made to increase competitiveness of the different regions and also to promote economic development. Let's move to the last presenter, who is Sandra. Sandra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Thanks to the WTO Market Access Division for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present what we are doing in DHL Express when it comes to the use of technology to improve our customs clearance data. So next page, please. A couple of facts and figures around my company, which explains also a little bit the environment we are working on. We are operating in 220 countries, so I've seen some small remote countries joining. So I'm very happy. I'm sure we are operating there as well. So 220 countries, so really a global coverage. We have 15,000 customs colleagues in my organization doing import, export, transit clearances. And we are dealing roughly with 200 million shipments to be cleared every year. So quite a number spread around the world, many customers, 3 million, small, large ones, knowledgeable, not so knowledgeable customers. So basically a big umbrella we are dealing with. And that's the environment. And that's where I'd like to come from when I talk about the use of technology and artificial knowledge and everything we can bring in. What we are trying is we are trying to help our customers to bring the shipments across the borders without bothering them too much, trying to, let's say, enrich their data they are giving us, but at the same time also making sure that we give to the authorities, to the government, the best data we can. Yeah, and that's really the balancing act, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what we are doing here. So on the next page, we are very committed when it comes to compliance. So we're a German-based company. We do what we can to make sure that the data we are submitting to the authorities, and I now have the focus on the customs authorities, is correct, is as precise and as we can get it. And we launched already 2 years ago a global customs compliance program, which is around 4 areas. It's around undervaluation, because unfortunately we have customers who are using our network and to basically ship undervalued goods. It's a fact, we can't deny it, but we are working to mitigate the impact of these shipments in our network as much as we can. Also, we have customers who are misusing our network for intellectual property right infringements. So again, we can't prevent it, but we can take measures to mitigate the impact and to reduce these type of non-compliance customers in our network as much as we can. We also have customers who don't like to give us true shipper and receiver information. So we get a lot of information from our customers. And of course, we need to know where we need to pick up a shipment and where we need to deliver it. But that doesn't mean it's a true shipper receiver behind. And of course, for the authorities, it is important that they know who sells, that they know who buys, and that they not only know who's the warehouse or the logistic company who is facilitating the distribution and the delivery. And last but not least, goods description. Of course, we all want to know what's in the package. We all want to know what we transport. The authorities want to know what actually is being exported, what's being imported. And for that, we need a detailed goods description. Easier said than done sometimes, as we can clearly see, and we do a lot of educational work with our customers to explain to them why we need a goods description and what a good goods description versus a very vague one like sample spare parts is. And these are the 4 focus areas where we're really pushing hard to bring the level of data quality higher and to improve by doing that the compliance level in our network, but also in our communication with the authorities. So I picked 2 examples to show you in reality, practical case, how technology can really help us in these areas to improve the compliance level based on the data we are getting from our customers, because that's a big challenge for us. What we are in a sandwich position. We get the data from our customers. We need to trust them, work with them, submit import and export declarations to the authorities, and then the authorities are quite often asking us, is this data really correct, or what else can you give me? So that's a little bit where we are in. And that's where we are really trying to use technology to support us in this sandwich position. So on the next page, one example I picked on identifying non-compliant customers in our network when it comes to undervaluation and IPI infringements. Very simple thing, but it has proven to be very efficient. We are basically merging human intelligence and artificial intelligence. What does it mean? We have human beings who are looking into the shipment and the information which are provided by our customers. And they are analyzing them. And by analyzing them, they are configuring what we are calling green and red lists. Red lists are the rules, which means that we intercept shipments. So, for example, we define a red list which says when shoes are declared below $20 and the shipper name is Joseph or Sandra or whoever, and it's going to the US, we always intercept because we have identified based on historic data that these type of shipper description value combination together with the origin and destination of shipment is highly likely to be undervalued. Or we have seen, oh, this customer always gives us the right value. He is fully compliant, so we put him on a green list or we set up a green role. So that means we never intercept these type of shipments because we know that the value is correct. So we use human beings who are looking into historic data to set up these rules. The same can be done also out of machines. So we are also using machine learning models. So the machine or the model works based on learning from historic data. So let's say if we ship shipments from, let's say, Hong Kong into France, and in France, the authorities stopped the shipment and checked them, and they were undervalued. We would work with the checkpoint. So that means internally in our network, we would trigger a checkpoint to our network saying this shipment was confirmed undervalued by the authorities, or it was confirmed undervalued by us. And based on that data we are creating ourselves in our network, based on the knowledge and intelligence we are basically creating, the model works, and the model knows, the machine knows then, oh, this is a very likely high risk undervalued product, which I need to stop. And we are basically retraining the model based on the learning patterns, based on the DHL checkpoints we are generating. And that's one idea. And we bring both intelligence levels together. And based on that, we have very good screening results. So that means we are stopping the shipments right at origin, so it doesn't enter in our network. So we are stopping, for example, if we have identified a very likely undervalued shipment, we are stopping it at origin. We are asking the shipper to give us a proof of purchase so we can actually see what the value is. Or we are working with the companies like Nike or whoever it is and ask them, is this really your product or is it an IPI infringement product? And only after it's confirmed, we allow the shipment to come into our network. It's a big commitment from us, but it has proven to be quite successful. That's one example. The other example on the next page, please, I'd like to share with you is what can we do around customers? So we somehow need to differentiate what are our good customers, what are our bad customers. Bad means not so compliant customers, very likely. So on that one, the best case to do that is when you open a new account with us. So if you're a new customer and you want to ship with us, somehow we need to ensure that we let the good customers in and we leave the bad customers out. That's the idea. Again, very simple. We have set up a process with technology to basically do a check when a new account request comes to us. And we are checking basically, again, against historic data. So based on the cell phone number, based on the bank account, based on the email address the customer is giving us when he opens a new account with us, we are checking, does his cell phone number or does this email address already has a history with us? And the history could be, it has been used by a denied party. So it was identified as a denied party based on our denied party screening. We closed the account, and now this cell phone number pops up in a new account request. Very likely, it's somehow linked to this denied party. Or another example is we have already used the address. And again, the address was used in combination with undervalued shipments. We close the account because we don't want these undervalued shipments in our network. Now the customer tries to open a new account, we immediately identify it. Same with the bank account, same with combination of all this information. So basically, again, based on historic data, based on the knowledge and intelligence we created in our organization, we are using that to stop customers opening accounts with us, which we don't want to have in our network because they have been identified as non-compliant. And these are two examples I wanted to share with you what we are doing with the use of technology, with the use of intelligence, with data we are creating in our own network, and try to bring the compliance level up. On the next page, please. So this works fine, but on top of using the technology, I think it is important that we means the authority side, and we as the express industry, we work together on, okay, how can we further make benefit out of that? How can we further elaborate on that? How can we further speed up on that? And I think there's a lot to do. We can do on both sides together. For example, I think it would be very beneficial to work on a quality control framework together. There must be clear rules and governance model when it comes to automation and data enrichment. Again, we are the sandwich kit in between. We rely on the data which the customers give us. We try our best to provide a high quality import-export declaration to the authorities, but somehow we have constraints, and the constraint is the data we are getting from our customers. So if our customer doesn't have a clue what an HS code is, we help, yeah, and we do use auto classification, another way of using technology in the clearance process, which was already mentioned today a couple of times. We're using that type of technology, but what happens if it's wrong? It's a wrong result we are getting out. So the data we are creating is not correct. Do we have a chance to correct it or to understand even that it's not correct? Relatively difficult in our environment. So hence, it is important with all these new technology opportunities which are coming in, that we get a common ground and a clear understanding what the authorities accept, what can we do, and how can we somehow set up a quality control framework that if something happens, nobody of our employees, for example, goes to prison, which is an important issue. Automation level as a competitive advantage. I think a lot of authorities underestimate how important automation is, at least in our industry. And we see authorities being very open for discussions, being very open for joint projects, others not interested. I think it is important that the attractiveness of automation is also brought to the authority side. And for example, AEOs get easier access to automation and support in automation versus maybe companies which are not AEOs. The third topic I would like to raise is there must be an acknowledgement of compliance efforts. If we are closing accounts or not allowing certain customers in our network, if we are stopping potential undervalued shipment, this is a big commitment from the company. And again, we are very committed to compliance and willing to do that, but it's a balancing act, because if at the same time there are providers who are more than happy to carry these kinds of goods into countries, we haven't won anything, we only lost. So therefore, there must be a mutual recognition of compliance effort supported by technology to really foster the use of technology in that area. Standardization is key. I mean, you can only automate, and we are operating, as I mentioned, 220 countries, if you have a certain standardization. If every customs authority asks for different data sets, it's very hard to standardize, and it's very hard to use technology to the extent it would be possible. And last but not least, I think it's important, capacity building, awareness trainings, so that we both learn from each other. We are more than happy to share, and I think Lars mentioned it as well, we're more than happy and open to share our information, which we collect with the authorities, because we are all there to ensure that our supply chain gets more compliant and secure. Last but not least, on the next page, if you need a good read over
Sorry, Sana, to interrupt. Perhaps if you can just wrap up quickly so we can move on. Thank you.
That's exactly what it is now. So last page, here you are. If you need a nice read over the weekend, there's a WCR article of DHL Express efforts on compliance increasement via the use of technology. And with that, thank you very much, and over back to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think if I can perhaps just mention one thing that you reminded me when you were describing everything that you are doing to improve the data, is that we need to have the right data in a way that can be processed and exchanged, but in a trustworthy manner. No, otherwise we have the problem that we may have a huge amount of data, but then I think the unofficial term that it is used in the jargon is trash in, trash out, right? We need to have the right data, otherwise the systems do not work properly. Thank you very much for the presentations. We will now move on into the questions section. And we have quite a few questions already from the participants online. I'm not going to read them exactly as they were presented. And I'm going to try to group some of them as well. And I would like to begin with two questions, which I think are similar in nature. One of them is from Petro Chersityuk, and the other one is from Raymond Yi. And here the question is, what's the relationship of all this data which is being collected with trade secrets, business confidentiality, and especially because you're collecting information from all sorts of third parties? What about data privacy and legal proprietary type of challenges? So I don't know which of the presenters would like to address this issue, because I imagine this is one of the obvious issues you have to deal with when dealing with all this aggregation of data. No? So I cannot see or hear, so.
I can start.
I can see. Thank you, Lars.
Yeah. No, and I'm sure my colleagues can underline this for me. This is, of course, very much, as you say, on top priority for all of us today, right? We know that the future is data-driven. We know that we need this digital trade pipelines and corridors to be able to work efficiently in the future. So obviously, there's a very high compliance issue around also looking into the data privacy of our customers and taking care of that in a safe, secure way. And also how we use it internally in our company between different parts of the company for various purposes, as well as how we share it with, of course, other stakeholders of the supply chain, including government agencies, is something that is regulated very heavily in various ways, of course, within this framework. So it's a relevant question, but I also see that I think we had more discussions around it 1 or 2 years ago. It's still very on the top of the agenda. It's always there in every dialogue we have with clients and with government agencies. However, we are also more and more looking into this trust-based system where we actually say, if there is a kind of a framework agreement on what we share and for what reasons and how the purpose is for that data. Our experience, as in the example I showed with UK government sandbox piloting, is that our clients are willing to share the data under certain circumstances, also more data than we shared before. And obviously we do what we can, and obviously we always make sure that we are not revealing data in the sense of privacy or commercial sensitivity and so forth. But there are ways of handling that, both from aggregation of data, as you mentioned, and looking at patterns rather than looking at the individual cases, but also in some of the cases as well, just keeping it compartmentalized in the sense that it's always the ownership of the client or the trader or the importer exporter of the data. And let me finalize by saying this is one of the big messages I always say to our clients and to private sector as well. You need to own your own data. Sometimes they lend it to us, sometimes to DHL, sometimes to Altana or GTS, because we are there to help them as service providers to use the data in a smart, safe, and secure way together with other partners and making a seamless journey of that digitalization journey. But on the other hand, it should be the ownership of the importer export. They need to own their own data. They need to keep it like it is gold in the bank, because it literally is.
Thank you, Lars. I see also Luis would like to address this, and then we move to the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy, and thank you, Lars. Getting things running smoother and to picking up the speed. And I think it is important that this framework of trust that must be adopted both from a government point of view and from the private sector point of view We cannot hide behind the data being confidential and the data being sensitive. Otherwise, we're never going to make progress. And I think either on a bilateral or within a regional basis, we need to create the framework. A very good example is the AFTA initiatives around digital policies and procedures, where we need to agree how the data can be shared, what data can be shared, and what can be done with that. Those rules of engagement is correct. Sandra made the appeal. If we've got that framework, we can share the data without violating confidentiality or sharing trade secrets. So very much support what Lance and Sandra said in this regard. But this is one of the things that we're going to have to tackle. I want to have an African proverb here. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We have to tackle this problem. Otherwise, we're not going to win this battle. So thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I'm taking a lot of notes in terms of new sayings, and that's a very good one. Let me now move to another issue that was raised by Saili Ayub. And I think this is a question to Lars in terms of whether there is an impact on revenue of these measures, either positive or negative.
Yes, very much so. Where we have done projects on exchanging of pre-arrival data of various kinds, and also using trust-based system, as Luis and all my other colleagues on the panel have been talking about. Sandra mentioned it in her presentation as well. There's absolutely a very positive impact on revenue collection as well, and that means that for me it's always about paying the right amount of data of revenue, right? So it's about again, making sure that we actually are doing the right things when it comes to trade compliance relating to revenue. But from government perspective, the revenue collection have been much more accurate. I'll say that it also goes up, by the way. But on the other hand, we also know that private sector today overpays 5 to 6% in average because they just don't use some of the trade facilitation measures like free trade agreements or technical agreements or standardization of simplifications that WTO and others have put in place. So I think that it's very much a relevant question, and the answer is yes, it has a positive impact, regardless if you look at it from a government perspective of getting the right revenue in and to a higher degree, and from a private sector to actually pay the right amounts of revenue as well. And the actual savings from a trade facilitation point of view are huge, like Luis was referring to before as well. We have seen 30–40% of decrease in cost for administration and other things as well, in cost, also cash flow gains through borders for SMEs as an example, from these type of exercises where we use data to actually simplify and streamline and secure the process through borders.
Thank you, Lars. We now have a question here from the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Alan Treat from the United States Mission here in Geneva. Thank you for those really interesting presentations. I had one question for Ms. Morgan from Altana, if she's still online. Very interesting presentation on the use of AI to develop your value chain profiles and the example of the Scope 3 emissions. My question is, how are these data verified or audited? You'd mentioned that some of this data is reported to regulators. And so I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to that verification of data that's generated by artificial intelligence. Thank you very much once again.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'll try to keep this pretty high level. When Altana built the map, so that global map of the international supply chain activity, we are using public, non-public, proprietary data sets to pull all of that together. And then when we work with a customer, they bring their data and they link that up into that map. So what happens is when they see their multi-tier value chains, two things happen. One is Altana uses machine learning models to actually curate the value chains that are appropriate. So we get rid of the noise. We get rid of all of the the inputs and outputs from those facilities that may have no bearing on their business, like things like office equipments and supplies, things that don't go into the making of the actual product. So we remove that noise. And then the customer, the user, can actually go through and do that verification. They can trim and tailor those value chains as appropriate. Because we provide all of the underlying data that we see linking entities, they can very well say, right, I can see this linkage. This does not impact my business, or these transactions have no bearing on my products. And they can adjust that in the inside the system. So they no longer see those connections, or they no longer get those false positive results, or they see fewer of them. The intention really is to empower the user with information they wouldn't normally have, so they can take that action. Now they're starting from a place of power with their suppliers to do the appropriate investigation, so that when they do go to report to the regulators, that data is an accurate, relevant reflection of their actual business. Happy to go into more detail at any time, but I hope that was high level enough to answer the question for today.
Thank you very much. I think we have, sorry, yes, one more question here from the floor, and then we can move on. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to Louise regarding her presentation. She mentioned that it's a test, it's a pilot project. Are other African countries going to be able to benefit from this pilot? And if yes, what are the conditions that we have to fulfill to be able to be part of that pilot? Thank you.
Perhaps if I take profit of your question to add one question that we also got online from Edith Jimenez. And she was saying impressive views of AI and blockchain, but how can developing countries benefit from this? So perhaps, Louise, I think you're perhaps the best position to talk about this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roy. And I managed to switch, so I got the back end of the question from our French colleagues, so apologies. But I think to answer the question, the principles that we used within our work is really available to any country within the African continent, well, any country across the globe to use. It was just convenient for us operating in South Africa to do the pilot from South Africa to Eswatini. And public sector agree to take part in the project, and that they set up the framework with which this data can be shared and the process can be moved forward. So I think that's critically important. You do need to get the parties together, and you do need to decide what is the aim of the project, what you want to achieve, establish the framework, as I said in my second last slide, plan it out, put the measurement criteria in place that you're going to measure the performance against, and then go ahead with the project. So yes, very welcome if you want to reach out to me to start the discussions and engagement. This work that we do is, as I also mentioned in the last slide, is very much built on the standards, both the WCO and GATE, that Lars is very much familiar with. A lot of the principles that is built into the World Trade Organization's agreements has been incorporated in this, and thereby it makes it very easy to make this a process that can be built on in the corridors. Our dream from an Africa perspective is really what the Secretary General of the WTO said, to improve inter-Africa trade through the AFTA protocols that is now in place, and especially with the rates of Africa, open up the corridors, drive down the cost, and improve the speed with which we can.
Louise, I'm really sorry to cut you, but we're almost out of time. I saw that Lars wanted to say something. So Lars, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'll be really
Thank you.
short. I think what Louise said. I think Sandra's comment before about also looking into authorized economic operator benefits for companies is very important. important for developing countries and SMEs as well. Because if we actually they have invested together with the customs administration and private sector partners in these countries to actually be part of a trade compliance system. Let's also use that as policymakers and in our regulations, that we take it into account to make it simplified for them to actually be part of value chains. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. One thing that for me was very interesting, and perhaps let me begin by thanking, the speakers for their very interesting presentations, and also for I think we had the maximum of 265 participants at some time. So thank you very much for joining us from all over the world. I think my colleague gave me a little paper, which I just lost, where we had some of the countries that were joining. I will mention them in a few moments, but it's really quite impressive in terms of where you are joining us to listen to this discussion from all over the world. One thing that was very interesting to me is that many of the actions that have been described are very much aligned to the objectives of the Agreement on Trade Facilitation. So basically, all these new technologies are doing nothing more than help us to basically implement objectives that we already have here at the WTO. So we have people from places like Suriname, Solomon Islands, etc. Also, I think I saw somebody from Cabo Verde. So thank you for joining us today in these discussions. A lot has been said. I'm not going to try to pretend to summarize everything, but perhaps just 5 things which I thought were quite interesting, at least to me. One of them is that the private sector is taking a much broader, let's say, approach in terms of how they're tackling to address these issues. Perhaps if we work for governments, we're typically looking at customs and other border agencies, but then you saw that in the type of systems that they are developing, they're really trying to address everything, right? So when we're talking about a holistic approach, it's really everything, including export controls, including all sorts of new regulations which are being in place. So I think, at least for me, this was interesting. The second one has to do with the how we do digitalization. So digitalization is unavoidable. It is coming, but the question is, what's the right way of doing it? So there are also pitfalls that have to be avoided. There are challenges that have to be taken into account. And I think some of the ones that were mentioned is, for example, how do we ensure that government agencies exchange information amongst themselves? How do we ensure the quality of the data? To what extent this data can be shared with whom and how? So there was the whole issue of the framework, and how can we improve it? Another third message that I think was interesting is the importance of creating systems that are interoperable amongst themselves. And I think this interoperability is really the maximum level of interoperability that we can achieve. It has to do with government agencies amongst themselves inside a particular country, but also how do you exchange information with the private sector, and of course, how we do that with respect to the agencies of other governments outside, and then the importance of international standards. Standardization is key in this respect. Then we have another one that has to do with the technologies, and they do have a lot of potential. But then, of course, we are using technologies to streamline processes. So we also have to pay attention in terms of how these processes are simplified. This is the example I was giving you before. If we have bad processes that we digitize, we end up with bad digital processes, right? So this simplification and how to improve the processes themselves is also a key part of the question. And then the final part, which I think practically all of them mentioned, has to do with the needed collaboration between governments and the private sector. So it's basically essential if we want to ensure the success of these initiatives. There are many ways in which this can be done. And I think these public-private partnerships were mentioned quite a few times. And then just to say that basically only by working together, we can really maximize the benefits that these technologies bring to the table. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to the presenters, thanks to the interpreters. Thanks also to the excellent team that is here with me and was able to make this happen. To my colleague Irina Tarasenko and also to my colleague Daniela Tiguliak for their assistance. And thank you very much. And we wait for you and invite you for the next webinar that we're going to be organizing in a few months. Thank you.